Hello, my name is JP Kuehlwein. Welcome to the Influencers webcast here at the conference board. And today I'm excited to introduce the CMO of General Mills, Ivan Pollard, to the studio. Thanks a lot, Ivan, for being here. Ivan has also graciously volunteered to be the chairman of the Marketing and Communications Institute. So we have kind of a double relationship here going on for this interview. Thanks again for coming.
You're welcome.
Ivan, before we go into marketing and you being the CMO and what that entails, tell us a little bit about your past, because you've got a checkered/interesting one. You've actually been on the client side and the agency side. Tell us a little bit about where you come from.
So I was born at a very early age in a place called England, and aspired to be a marketer from the time I actually couldn't get a job doing anything else. So I started in agencies in London back in the 1980s when media was still part of a full service agency. And I went through the transition as the media team was taken out of the creative agency. From there, I went and set up a couple of my own companies, exploring the space of advising clients where to spend their money. And me and a few friends coined the phrase connections planning. So for 25 years, I was agency side, running my own businesses and working on big global accounts. And then Coca-Cola asked me if I would like to go and work for them, and I said yes. And they said, would you like to know doing what? And I said no, as long as I can come and work for you. And I spent 7 years at Coca-Cola running global media and communications to begin with, and then moving to the North America team and running sponsorships and digital. And then 2.5 years ago, I was lucky enough to move to General Mills, a great company with great people in it, with a magnificent portfolio of interesting products. So client side, agency side, and all the way through driven by a passion for understanding people, brands, and marketing. So
you've got multiple perspectives and are a little bit schizophrenic, I guess, when you look at things like looking at it from the media angle, what does the agency, what would we do there, and from the manufacturer side. Now, you're the CMO at General Mills. There's been a ton of discussions around CMO, even fundamentally about the role of the CMO. Famously at Coca-Cola, where you worked, they seem to have eliminated that job and now brought it back. Personally, do you think the CMO is going to go away, and where do you see it going in this job?
I think it's a good question, and I think it's a dynamic topic to which there is no one right answer. I think I'd probably start with, is marketing a critical function as we go forward, to which I would answer yes. I think the definition of marketing is changing, and the application of it is definitely changing exponentially. So there's a kind of thought that everything is marketing, which I'm not sure I 100% agree with, but I can see where it's coming from. But also marketing's impact and the way you engage consumers and leverage data and analytics and insights, and then turn that into stories that make people really love your brand. I think that's far more reaching than the old traditional definition of what a CMO was. So I understand why companies are changing it. And I think the answer to does a company need a CMO or not depends upon the nature of the company itself, not on the definition of the role of a CMO.
Right.
So I think Coca-Cola, it was an interesting experiment. I think it's a marketing-led company. I think bringing back a CMO is a very good move for them.
And who for you there are ultimately interfaces because the CMO cannot cover everything. What are for you currently the key interfaces? I would guess with sales probably, etc. Yeah. Who are the key players that you need to play with daily on the playground?
Well, they actually do think that, as I said, this kind of thought that everything has a marketing component to it now. So you do need to connect across the organization, right, as most C-suite people do, I think. But the critical components of it at the moment appear to be technology. So your chief technology officer, your chief data officer, sales, where I think sales and marketing are coming crashing back together, especially when we start to think about closed loop data and e-commerce. And I think the corporate affairs teams and the corporate reputation. Mm-hmm. So those three are vital, but if you're really doing marketing properly, you better be talking to your supply chain, and you better be talking to your product team, and you better be talking to all of the people, R&D, legal, whatever it may be. So I think the fundamentals of marketing need those connections. I think the application of marketing now is getting such a big job that you can only play marketing as a team sport, I think, these days.
Right. And nowadays also, we can't talk marketing without talking technology, big data, social media, and all of that. It seems that there is a lot of silos building up, or at least differentiations that I know one person we both read a lot about, Mark Ritson, says that's BS. Like, there shouldn't be such a thing as digital marketing. Digital is such an integral part of marketing that there shouldn't be a separation. There should be a different department. How are you looking at that?
Yeah, I think Professor Ritson on this one is right. I think it's true.
Which seems to indicate he's not right on other things. We'll talk about
We'll talk about that later. And yeah, I think the thing about it is, and this was something that was going on at the Coca-Cola company a while back, being great at digital is a myth. It's a red herring, and it's plainly, I think it's a distraction. What I think we have to concentrate on is being brilliant at marketing. The trick is we have to accept that we're doing that in a digital world. So anybody who would come to me and ask, hey, what's the digital strategy here? I would ask them to explain to me first what non-digital strategy was. And that was a conversation stopper. So I think there is no separation between digital data, analytics, and marketing. I think they are integral components of each other. And so brilliant marketing in a digital world is what I think we set out to do.
And since you have a media background, I guess also this old differentiation of, let's say, newspaper or TV doesn't make sense anymore, because if I look at the New York Times, I can pick it up in any kind of format, and I can watch most of my TV on YouTube. So it doesn't help actually to look at it this way, it would seem.
Probably not. I mean, but I think this has been going on for the best part of 20 years now, which is, if you're a consumer wanting to get information or entertainment, you know, you can consume the same thing in many different places, right? So I watch the Premier League on my phone, I watch it on a TV set, I listen to it on a podcast with people doing it, I can go and get it YouTube highlights, whatever I want, I can go find. But also in any one of those places, I can consume lots of different things. On my phone, I can read a book, watch a film, you know, do my homework, do whatever it is I need to do, even talk to my mum. So
and advertising can pop up in
any
of these
advertising
places.
Can be in any of those places. And I think what we've got is this wonderful thing, the old traditional things about media. Okay, what do you want to say to whom, when, where, and how are you going to say it for the lowest possible cost? They still apply. Our optionality on it, massively different.
Some translation for our American audience, Premier League is soccer, and my dear is perfectly okay in British English.
That's true.
What about the separation between performance and marketing and the so-called performance marketing? Does that make sense, or shouldn't all marketing perform?
It should. I think this is wrapped up with the kind of the notion of short-term advantage and long-term gain. So I think performance is a component of marketing. I think it's specialist techniques for the application of it. That is a different discipline.
It's a tactical
discipline,
and
you need unique
skill.
skills in that, right? So we go back to soccer. I do need somebody who's pretty big and tall who can jump and head a ball in the goal, right? They're still part of a team, though.
Exactly. Now to my favorite subject: where does actually building the brand strategy, brand identity fit in with all of that? Because it seems to me, when you go to any conference, these tactical details have taken over. What's your perspective on that?
Well, I think for me and for General Mills, and actually for most brand-led companies, I think we believe that brands still matter. It doesn't matter which generation you're talking to, brands matter. I think actually part of bringing a brand to life is the creativity, and I think that's starting to get elevated back up people's agenda. And I think the idea that advertising works is kind of the third component of that. So this belief in brands, both in the short-term leverage they give you in order to command a premium price, elevate your distribution, get sought out, you know, make less effort to get bought for more money. I like that, and I think that's where it goes. I think there is also a set of tactics that allow us to actively pursue new avenues, and maybe the brand foundations and the brand strategy, whilst they're the same the same philosophy, they have different applications these days, and you have to work out how to get that done as effectively and efficiently as you can.
We had just a conversation with some marketing practitioners, and one of the top of mind subjects was actually reputation, not only of the brand, but of the company behind it. it seems to me that very much links as well with the whole idea of brand identity being key, because that's like, if I lift the facade, the curtain, I should not be surprised by what is behind it. Does that make sense?
It's true. I think it was probably always true. You know, you go back to where brands started, it kind of like, you know, it was what you stuck on your pottery or your sword that says you can trust this because it came from this particular manufacturer or proprietor. That's still true today. I just think that curtain you talked about is very flimsy, diaphanous, and is open all the time. So it's almost impossible to close the curtain and hide what you do as a company. So your reputation, what you do, how you act, what you say, those things affect what people think and feel about you, which is the definition of a brand.
How do you do this then as a big group that has brands across categories, sometimes maybe even categories that have no logical linkage to each other? I'm thinking my own background at Procter & Gamble, you know, Charmin toilet paper and Pringles chips. Don't necessarily fit together. How do you do that? How can you have a corporate brand that also fits with your house of brands?
So I think that's a good question, because underneath it all, if you as a consumer want to know where this brand comes from and which company made it, you will always find out. So I do think that the idea of building a corporate reputation and allowing it, because it came from Nike, it must be a really good tennis racket. Okay, they don't make tennis rackets, maybe that's the reason. It must be a really good tennis shoe because it's got the Nike brand on it. I think it works for them. I think in some of the sort of people who have a portfolio of brands, the corporate reputation is still really important. It may not be the thing you lead with, but it's definitely going to be a thing that needs to back it up. And I think that corporate reputation comes from every interaction that any consumer, any stakeholder, any constituent, an employee, an investor, a shopper, a customer, every interaction has to kind of reinforce what it is you believe you really are as a company and why you exist and what value you add to the world.
Interesting. Now, I know there's two beliefs that you have, at least based on reviewing some of your YouTube video footage, that might be shocking in a modern marketing world. One is, you still do believe that a very good film, a creative expression of a benefit, can be very impactful, even as a 30-second TV commercial. I think you agree there with Les Binet. And the second one is, something I saw yesterday, is you don't necessarily believe that big social media platforms or technology companies should be broken up. Which is very topical and popular as well right now in the marketing community. Let's talk about those two. The first one, really? 30-second TV spot, still good?
Yep.
Can you...
Oh, you want more? Sorry, I thought I just captured exactly the argument in a very brief snippet of film. So, why is it very good? Well, it depends what the job is that you're doing. Okay, so that's the first thing. So I would always start with, you know, who you're trying to influence and what change do you want to bring about and what's the story that you've got to tell. So this idea that that's the challenge for a marketer as you build a brand, and we should get into what we think we mean by brands and brand building and why they're so important, but a way of telling a story, if the story fits a TV commercial and a 30-second film, it still is a very compelling, very great way of doing it. You know, not many of us read Lord of the Rings, but a lot of us saw the film, right? So the idea that color, movement, sound, all of that magic can get brought to life in a film is a good one. Now, where you play that film, I think, is now many different variations of where you could run it. But yeah, I actually do think...
So it's the TV part that's outdated, it's not the film?
I would not even say TV is outdated. Depends on the job, right? So you want to sell me a new car and you want to get me whilst I'm sitting there relaxing on my own without the kids around, you can get me in the middle of an American football game, okay? So I watch the Vikings play the 49ers, I see the new Ford, Mach-E Mustang or whatever, it works.
So you fully assimilate it as what you want to tell our audience.
So I am. I'm going to buy an electric car, not that I can
very
drive.
Good question. You said, what is a brand even? Do you have a fitting definition that you use with your organization what a brand is?
Yeah, and I don't think it's my definition. I think this is derived from lots of brilliant people thinking about the same thing. But I think fundamentally a brand is all the things in a person's head that makes them believe your product is worth more than the product itself.
Right, it's the associations. I think Kotler said very early on, the 60s or 70s, that a company doesn't own the brand, it's the consumer who owns the brand. Is that still valid today?
I think it is. I think maybe we think that that's even more so now than it ever was, this transparency issue, this ability for a consumer to really get underneath or behind the curtain. Having said that, that does not abrogate the responsibility of the brand producer to articulate what it believes its brand is. I think the real truth here is about the word own. I'm not entirely sure people ever really own the brand, to Kotler's point, but I think you can shape it, and you can get people to think and feel and do things by the way you behave and you act. I think what's changed is the amount of time you have to spend doing that, the amount of volatility there is in that, the amount of receptivity and listening you have to do, because if your consumer wants a part in your brand, you need to embrace that. And I think that's the definition of not owning the brand.
And I think there's a misconception about consumers wanting to put together the brand for you because they don't want to do that work.
No.
I mean, Steve Jobs said, I'm not going to let other people design the phone. A, they can't do it.
Yeah.
And B, they want me to lead as a brand. I guess that comes in. We're going to talk about how you're going to disband Facebook or not, but we're going to take a break first for a few messages here by the conference board. So see you on the other side.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the conference board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
All right, welcome back to this Influencers webinar here with Ivan Pollard, the CMO of General Mills. And Ivan, we were just talking about big technology companies, platforms in particular. I think there are increasingly voices across the industry calling for them to be disbanded or to be separated because they're having too much power, including pricing power, I guess, when it comes from a media angle. And I think you've commented several times that you're not sure that would be a smart thing. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. I think, as you may notice if you're watching the video, big is actually a good thing. I was so small, they came in and raised my chair to make sure that I'm on level with you. So I think big matters and size matters. So why would I apply that logic to Google and Facebook and other big conglomerates that are kind of operating in this space? Well, I actually think that when they use their size for good, right, which I actually do believe for the most part, some of those companies do, when they use their power and their scale for good, open transparency, communication, news, giving a voice to the consumer, when they use the scale for good, I think that's a good thing. And I don't think there are many kind of institutions that we can trust in the same way to do that sort of good thing. Look at what Apple have just done, standing up to the government about not unlocking a phone. To me as a consumer, you talk about reputation, that says the sort of company that they are. That means if they can stand up to the government protecting the privacy of somebody who's done something wrong, I'm pretty confident that they're not going to be selling my data to somebody else.
But would that mean that, or is then the consequence of what you're saying that you would rather trust a Google to treat your data right, your privacy, whatever it might be, the relationships with other suppliers, than a government entity to watch over that?
Well, I think it's not an either or. I want to trust both of them. So it's not a rather, but I don't want to disband Google and have an imbalance of power in this system. So, let's go back to the NSA and phone hacking and all that sort of stuff, right? You want a balance out there. And I also think it goes beyond data, putting the data to use for good, like the famous story about Google using data to stop the spread of malaria in underserved parts of Africa. Those sorts of things are good. Now, the government wasn't doing it and we weren't doing it, but Google went and did it. I think if you take some of that power away from them, they become less of a force in society.
Right.
Now, the flip of that was also, okay, well, how do I feel about it as an ex-media guy, and we're having to buy some of the capabilities that they sell us to be able to get there. And I think this is one of those aspects of brand building that has changed. I started as a media guy. You were trying to get to the right moment with the right person at the right time in the right way. I think we've got a specificity on what is right that goes down to the individual now. And
it's the famous one-on-one marketing at scale.
One-on-one, well, we'll come back to at scale, but the idea that you can get there at the moment that matters. You can get me any day of the week
the moment,
on my
the place,
mobile
the
phone.
occasion.
You can try and sell me a Band-Aid and tell me what it does for me, right? If you can get there when I've just cut my finger with a knife.
Ideally, I know you will cut your finger before you do
I've
it.
even done it, because I'm on there watching, following my Betty Crocker instructing me how to cook a beautiful chicken quesadilla with my old El Paso stuff. And yeah, you'll know what I'm doing before even, and you go, hey, looks like you need a Band-Aid right now. I like that. And I think that sort of thing that comes with the power and the scale of a Google to get to the moments that matter, that's a good thing. And I want to be able to use that as a marketer. And I also want to trust them that they're going to use all the other things to make life on the planet better for more people.
So I heard a discussion around Amazon from a data perspective, being able to predict for a woman that she's pregnant before she herself knows that she's pregnant, just based on the eating patterns or whatever other products they consume. The idea of Amazon then either developing products themselves or collaborating with manufacturers to then deliver to her messages and products for pregnancy and babies, etc., you think that's perfectly okay? Because there seem to be people who are building a business actually on the belief that that's creepy and we want to be different from that.
So I think you've got to treat all of this data with care. If it's in the, if you've been given permission and it's in the interest of the end user, consumer or user or just people. Whatever it is the one, if you can constantly add to me things that are useful, then I think that's good. Steve Jobs also famously said, hey, I've got to get so close to my consumers that I know what they need before they even know themselves. That led to the iPhone. Right? It led to the iPod. It's led to a lot of inventions.
But his key consumer was himself, basically. It wasn't about tracking other people 24/7.
Actually, well, was it about tracking them with their data? No. Was it about understanding what they wanted to do and the problems in everybody's life? Yeah, I think it was. So can we get out of this creepiness? I think as soon as it starts to feel creepy to you, as the marketer, you're doing something wrong. As soon as it stops feeling creepy to you and you haven't asked a consumer, you're doing something wrong. So I think this idea of put the data from these companies and from the data that you own yourself to the best advantage, not of the corporation, but of the consumer or the end user, I think actually that is a good thing to play by. And by the way, you can only get it wrong once. So you have to do that perpetually, because everybody's not going to remember all the other times you were right. They'll remember the one time you were wrong.
Now let's put this big versus small discussion in the context of a category you're familiar with now, which is food, not only since General Mills, but before. There seem to be a ton of small startups, some of them spectacular, at least in awareness creation, if not as a business, and we can talk about that seem to build on the myth of David versus Goliath, who said, we're the good ones, we fight big food. Mm-hmm. Whether it's in the fast food servicing business, whether it's in meats, whether it's in yogurts, dairy, it seems to be across the board. How do you tackle this as a big food player? Do you integrate them? Do you emulate them? Do you fight them? Do you do all of the above? What does that look like from your perspective?
Well, first of all, I think the big food companies go back to their strength, which is big. And actually, I think big food done right is actually one of the ways that we're going to feed a big world, right? So these little players with their business models, they're great. They're putting innovation into the market. They're anticipating consumer needs. They're perhaps moving with more nimbleness than we are. But we can do that too. What they can't do is do it at scale and do it, in a way that is accessible and affordable to the many, instead of being kind of meaningful and faddish for the few. So I think the big food companies are looking at the little food companies and going, yeah, I like what you're doing. We can do that too, and we can do so much more than you can do. And we will do it with a level of integrity that I think some, not all, but some of the smaller people are not held accountable to the same levels.
But isn't that exactly where the little guys challenge you and say, we can actually afford to do good and to be good because we don't have this big apparatus, and most of all, we don't have these shareholders who want, profit increases every quarter. You, big food, you're known to do these terrible things to us. So you see it the opposite way, actually?
So big food's known to do terrible things to people. Explain that a little.
Did you watch the Chipotle video on big food, i.e. probably McDonald's in their case versus them, and how food integrity, i.e. at that time in their case, no hormone-treated animal meats make it into their food, etc., etc.
That's true. And did you watch the news when Chipotle got it wrong and poisoned a lot of people?
Right. So that you say ultimately, do these?
I think the big companies are held to a standard,
right?
And you can work out the mechanics of that.
Right.
But they're held to a standard, and they hold themselves to a standard that I think is very high. Now, I'm not saying the little food companies don't.
And that's one of the reasons why they might be slower in innovation?
I don't think we're slow at innovation. And in fact, we can do as much innovation as the little. There's just many more of them than there are of big food companies by definition. And actually, the innovation kind of, the engine of the big companies is speeding up and has sped up. It will never be as fast as people, doing it ones and twos. But neither can they speed up serving those wonderful products that they make to the masses. Right. And that's what big food can do.
We had Joseph Jaffe in this seat a couple of weeks ago, and famously he has the Spill to Suck book where he basically says, unless you change, you're going to lose it because you're going to be gone. And look at the S&P 500. There's only like 10 survivors out of 500 over the last 100 years. You don't see it this way. You don't see media getting replaced by social media, Amazon replacing retail. You don't see this to happen in foods or in other consumer goods.
If we do nothing, the answer is yes, then you will lose. You go back 20 years and look at the companies that were in the top 10 of the S&P, then, not all of those had been like 100-year-old. It's not like this is a thing that's never happened. If you don't change to meet the needs of your consumer and the needs and the opportunities in the market, somebody will outperform you. But this is a myth that the big companies are not just as adept at reading the signals and acting on them as the little companies. So I actually would absolutely, I'd love to talk to Joseph about it, because...
maybe we'll make that happen.
You should do, because who's he trying to sell his services to? He's created a hypothesis that is self-serving, which is about him being able to advise big companies how to change. So,
Joseph, I think that's a direct challenge.
It's a direct challenge. And
we should pick up on that.
Hang on a minute, though. In that very premise that he could help big companies change, surely there's the assumption that they can. Otherwise, why would they pay him?
Right. Excellent. So we already have our next webinar set up here for us. Direct-to-consumer brands. Mm-hmm. So moving from brands and product to the go-to-market, if you like, are very much on everyone's lips and everyone's front door in terms of their packages. How do you look at that as big food? I hear people who say, no, groceries are a different animal. Other people say, no, in 10 years from now, we're not going to go to a grocery store anymore. How do you look at that?
So I think we're exploring it. Famously, the future is going to be written by those who have the courage to create it. So we're looking at all of those things. We were looking at it, by the way, 8-9 years ago and experimenting in some of these places. Now, the cost for the last mile is always a very interesting kind of thing, and that is predicted to fall quite rapidly. And we're seeing that already. Having said that, a lot of the people who are pure play grocery home delivery, finding that the current business model that says I can do to groceries what I can do to books or cameras or music, it's not working out quite the same. So working out how to do it is a challenge. Working out how to do it and make money is another challenge. How to do it, make money, and delight the consumer. That's where the magic's going to happen. So yes, it's a component. I don't believe retail is dead, but I do believe that we're going to have to rethink the omni-channel model, because it's not just about making a sale in all of these places. It's about the consumer experience and what that leads you to.
It seems to me that some of the old classics are coming back. Like, for example, if you have a business, you need to make a profit as well, which seems to haunt now some of these startups, like WeWorks would be one name you can easily drop there. Is part of the reason also why big companies might be accused to be slower, because they try to figure out how to make a profit, and maybe some of these venture capital funded small competitors are not looking at that?
Possibly. I mean, I think we could all lose money very quickly if we tried hard. I can do it in my personal life.
Aren't big food actually shut out of that because of the responsibility to the shareholder?
No, because I think they also have a responsibility as the shareholder to constantly innovate and constantly invent and constantly explore. So I think that is part of the contract with the shareholders. How you do it, I think varies. But yeah, I believe that the big food companies have just as much agility and nimbleness with the constraints of having to make a profit, which means that sometimes we won't step into an area. It's not that we're being slow. It might be that we're waiting for the cost to come down, or we're waiting for a business model to be proven.
I had a conversation yesterday with a ethical tea manufacturer, and it's not a new fashion thing. It's a company that exists for some 50 years. And they said it's very, very tough to eke out even a couple of percentage point of premium, because at the end of the day, most consumers are not willing to pay for that. Do you encounter that in your own business as well?
Yeah, but we also encounter people who are willing to pay, and that's part of the magic of brand building. You know, the brand, portfolio. As I said, well, no, I think you can build a brand that makes people willing to pay a little bit more than the product's going to cost you to make. So, you know, you're talking to your tea company from Sri Lanka, and what investment are they willing to put in order to make people want to pay the premium?
Right. Or can put in.
Family company. Yeah. So there are things where you go, okay, that's what the whole notion of a brand is. But yes, you know, we're all in the business of, you know, creating food that people love, right, for all of us, and finding a way of satisfying the shareholders. And, by the way, keeping the customer happy in the middle. So it's an ecosystem that I still think is valid, but it doesn't mean there's an ecosystem that doesn't have external pressure on it.
Maybe as a last item here, as we talk about love, you have an old love for agencies, but it seems that they're also criticizing you for treating you pretty harshly because their margins are going down. How do you see the relationship with agencies, with big companies and small ones, agencies? What do they need to deliver, and what should they expect from their clients?
Well, margins going down is interesting, and you know, I was there at the beginning of that as we started to take media away from creativity, and then the profit engine for the big groups became the media, and obviously a lot of the stuff around the transparency of what they were doing in the digital ecosystem, that eroded trust. Frankly, you know, you can look at the ANA report and see the things that were going on. So I think there's a trust issue there, but there's also a magic issue there. I think as they chased the money, they gave up on the very thing that the really big companies need the agency system for. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking advertising or in any space.
But weren't they both wound up in that, agencies and clients, in this world of digital transformation and chasing the influencer and programmatic
maybe
media?
But let me finish the thought,
right.
Which is, like, listen, as the media, as the groups chase that money, right? And yeah, the clients went along because there was this proposition that digital was going to get rid of all the wastage of traditional advertising. which again, I think fundamentally, I believe is a myth. You get to the right moment, digital is brilliant at it. You want to send a chipmunk up a tree, and you know which tree and for why, go digital, right? You want to get a few people scared at the drive-in movie, send a Tyrannosaurus Rex over the hill, okay? So sometimes big is good, sometimes little is good, and we're living in an age where we can do both. What I think happened, though, was the agency groups forgot about the power of creativity, and Bennett and Field will talk about this. But
by the way, we had them on a webcast. Just a little plug here. Yep.
So Les and Peter will talk about the power of a creative idea, and like I say, it doesn't need to manifest itself in a film or an ad or whatever your leap of kind of magic is, from the data and the insight to look at all the things everybody else looked at, see something different, and then do something magical with it. That magic, that was the value of the agencies. It wasn't them being able to leverage data and come and do programmatic buying and take some money away. We want that, but we also want this. So I think getting back a little bit of the trust that they've eroded and bringing back the magic, this idea that creativity and then brand, helping us with brand strategy, those two things I think are magical. No client can do it on their own.
Creativity, strategy.
Yeah.
Do you still want the integration with media, with digital,
yeah,
with performance marketing, as it's called?
Yeah. Who does that, though? So before I went client side, I was working at a company called Naked Communications, and before that we'd set up the first of these things in the world called Unity in London, that did all of the integrated communications planning for the release of Star Wars Episode 1, 2 and 3 all around the world, okay? So doing that orchestration, I think, is a skill and a talent. And it's a strategic skill and a talent, but it's also an orchestration skill. And
that an agency should do for their client.
An agency could do it, a client could do it, depends on the size of the job, and it depends on the nature of the capabilities on either side. But yeah, I think that orchestration is vital because, as we said earlier on, nobody's just watching one thing in one place. They're going to get their data, their inspiration, their information, their education from all sorts of places and all sorts of devices. So you need to work out and orchestrate how a brand remains consistent and delightful in all of those different places with a great big brand idea behind it that tends to be ongoing, and a proposition for the moment that tends to make it relevant.
Right. That sounds very much in tune with another ex-agency person, Bob Hoffman, who we had also on a podcast. Who thinks the agencies have chased a little bit too much the digital dollar, if you like, and gotten away from brand building and creative transformation, the strategy transformation into creative assets.
And don't get me wrong, we want both, right? But we want to use the tool for what it does best. I mean, in the old days when the horse broke down, I came along and I put a new kind of horseshoe on it. That was probably it, or a bag of feed.
Well, you're from Britain. I would have more of a car analogy.
You would have
from Germany.
Here we go. Then as the German Fraulein
engineer,
mechanic, she now turns up with a great big toolbox. She still has the same objective: get the car to go again and get on the road. But she's going to analyze what's wrong with the car, and then she's going to pick the right tool to get it done. That's the same with whether we do digital or whether we do TV or whether we do reputation management or whether we do influencers. Which tool is right for the job right now with the objective of keeping things growing and moving forward?
All right, excellent. 3 quick ones, and then we close down. Quick ones. Prince Andrew and Meghan Markle. No, I'm just kidding. What company or thought leader in the area of marketing and brand building actually inspires you, that you look to sometimes, maybe jealously, and is your inspiration as you think about marketing at General Mills?
Probably almost every other person in marketing inspires you. Everybody has got something to offer. So that's a kind of trite answer, but I get just as much from listening to Mark Pritchard as I do from talking to an ABM on Hamburger Helper. And
so those are the 2 people we should go on this show next?
Yes, they
Mark
should.
Pritchard and who at Hamburger Helper?
Erin Pisker. She's not on it at the moment, but she's very good.
Okay, noted.
So there's a guy called John Wilkins that worked with me, and then I worked for him. He's fantastic. He's at Accenture. I find Byron Sharp always provocative.
Podcast
and
at the conference board with Byron.
And brilliant. And then there's an old guy, friend of mine that I was at college with, called John Steele, who wrote Truth, Lies and Advertising. And you want to get back to the fundamentals of advertising, not necessarily full marketing, but advertising. He's a genius.
Let's have a new resolution, even if it's late. We'll have at least half of these people on the podcast this year. And the last question was, what do you eat for breakfast?
What have I always eaten for breakfast is a better question, which is Cheerios. And I've always been a Honey Nut Cheerios thing, and I'm not even making that up. The truth is, though, what do I drink for breakfast?
A sad moment in world culture.
Resting heart rate of 42 beats a minute, but I am overweight.
And still growing.
And still growing, yeah.
Thanks so much, Ivan. This was a great interview.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
And you, dear viewers or listeners, if you want more information, then always go to the conference board where there's plenty to have on our podcast, webinars, and other resources. Thanks for listening in today. Bye-bye.